this week, getting ready for this class, what I did was I Googled Left Behind, and boom, there's a new movie coming out this next week called Left Behind: The Rise of the Antichrist. And this is a Hollywood film, you know, the whole thing, and with special effects and all the rest. And we're going to look at the trailer. And this movie, there was a Nicolas Cage movie about Left Behind. I think it was called Left Behind, 20 years ago. And, you know, so that shows you how mainstream it is. If you get Nicolas Cage to do it, you've got mainstream. That was a gentle film compared to this, from what I can tell by the trailer. This one is more, wait for it, political. Yeah, shocking. It's more up to date because of that. So watch this. Here's the deal. The rapture happens. Everybody's trying to figure out what in the world happened. And this very charming, good-looking man, who looks a lot like Randy Ray, except without a beard, becomes the head of the UN, the United Nations, okay? Becomes the head of the United Nations, and he starts doing some things and bringing the whole world together. So that's the political opening for it. So let's watch the trailer right now. It's really short. Well, you have to see. Yeah. Here we go.
If someone had told me that millions of people were just going to disappear, I, like you, would have said they were crazy.
Was it the rapture?
Yes. Yes, it was.
Are you sure? I mean, are you really sure?
I saw it happen.
Those weren't vanishings.
It wasn't the rapture. The rapture was debunked on the first day.
The second wave of vanishings has thrown the financial markets back into chaos.
Trust me. You want to make sure you're on the right team.
You're already teaching them the art of fake news?
I just wish I could see you one more time. Why are you still here?
Because I asked God to leave me behind.
We don't need to look for magic. They're not a bunch of religious wackos.
Wackos like my mom.
Fortunately, we have a solution. We can implement Eat and Pay worldwide in a matter of weeks. Welcome to the future.
I got to look inside the Eat and Pay platform, and it's a whole lot more than a glorified bank card.
So you're just admitting to being crazy?
Yes, I'm quite comfortable with that. When it is all over, half the world will be dead.
This is the biggest news story since the vanishings.
You listen to me. You drag this line of nonsense into the public eye. We're both finished.
Now I'm more like an actor.
The Antichrist will declare himself as God.
Seemed like a stretch even for them.
How do we know who we can trust?
Trust God.
The world is suffering. We are on the brink of mass insanity.
What happens to the rest of us?
Doesn't it seem strange that it's still so easy to dismiss it, even though we saw it with our own eyes?
I'm sorry you can't hear the words. Maybe if we had, I don't know if you can find subtitles for that in English, that'd be great. But you got the point. I mean, you got the basic thing behind it and the tone. Again, this is a Left Behind movie coming next week. So I'm just trying to say this is current stuff. This is not left over from the 80s. This is still really big. And, you know, 30% of the people in this country are probably going to think this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So just know that. What I want to do is unpack why we got here with this. Let me say a couple words about the film, though. The thing that goes with the title, Left Behind: The Rise of the Antichrist, is that it is, quote, based on a true story that hasn't happened yet. Got it? Based on a true story. So what happens is, again, it's the rise of the Antichrist. So it's all about this guy who becomes head of the UN. And he's got really good gray hair, and he's very handsome, right? And he's the one who keeps saying nice things there, and he charms the world. And he comes up with this plan in the middle of all the stock markets go down because of the rapture. I'm really surprised that all the stock markets would go down because all of the people got raptured. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So all the stock markets go bad, and everybody's having trouble. And the head of the UN says, we've figured out how to do this. We're going to have this program of even pay. Welcome to the future is what he says. Even pay, welcome to the future. So the whole idea of everybody getting the same amount of money, it comes from who? The Antichrist. That's the message. Now, is there anything in the Bible about even pay? Anything in the Bible by like Jubilee? Like 68% of the Bible is about pretty much even pay. 68% is about equal justice for all people. And it has to do with money. And Jesus talks about it, talks your ear off about it in the book of Luke. So amazing. But according to this view of Christianity, this is from the evil one. Okay? And this movie is here to prove it. And everybody's going to say, yeah, for sure. I know that. Okay, so again, what I want to talk mostly about is this guy, John Nelson Darby, who is responsible for this movie and so many things that happened before it to lead up to it. He is the founder of pre-tribulation dispensationalism. Pre-tribulation. Is anyone here really familiar with this stuff? Yeah, Dan has read about it. Not too many. Yeah, most of us don't know a whole lot about it. A little bit, right? Right. Okay. He's born in Westminster area of London in 1801. So this is really important. He comes right after the French Revolution. And the French Revolution is a big deal, right? All these movements always come out of times of chaos. And, the French Revolution started out as this, egalitarian thing that kind of all went to hell real quickly because of the fear and the violence and all the things that went with it. And we could talk more about that. But, French Revolution is chaos on steroids. And it scared the whole world because France was the center of Europe. I mean, it was. In 1801, that's where power structures were. And this was a little bit like what happened in the Protestant Reformation. In the Protestant Reformation, which happens almost 300 years before the French Revolution, in early 1500s, you have all of a sudden this great sea change in the world. There's the Gutenberg press, comes along, and all of a sudden information's everywhere, and it's in the hands of poor people. And they're beginning to read, so all of a sudden you don't have just a small percentage of people reading, you get a lot more people reading and being empowered. And along with all the change, the Catholic Church, which everyone thought would be around forever, is on its knees because of what's happening in Germany and France and everywhere else in Europe. There's a sense of chaos and fear among people and excitement. And what happens is you get a peasant revolt in Europe. The peasants are armed, they're on the streets, they're asking for a better life. And to give you a sense of how difficult this is, Martin Luther himself, who's a big part of why this happens, tells the power elite to go ahead and kill the peasants, who are asking only for, justice, because Martin Luther believes what? The end of the world will be coming soon. There's no other way to explain all the change for him. So he figures, kill him, you're sending him to heaven anyway, and this will all be over. I'm just going to stay here in Wittenberg, Germany, and Jesus will be back, next week or next month. This is how this happens. This is where these kinds of crazy movements come, out of moments of history that kind of get out of hand that no people saw coming. Okay, so we have this Darby guy who was educated at Trinity College Dublin because he's an Irishman, even though he's born in London. His parents had money. He didn't study theology. He was brilliant at languages, which is a little important in the story a little bit later. He's ordained at 24 as a curate. You've heard the word curate, C-U-R-A-T-E, in the Anglican Church. That's, the Church of England. Even though he's an Irishman, and with his Irish credentials, even though he's born in England, he goes to Ireland, and he has this incredible success converting Irish peasants and everybody, middle class, to Anglican belief, until an archbishop in Dublin, the Archbishop of Dublin, who's of course a British subject, says, "This is great. It's wonderful what you're doing, Mr. Darby, but make sure that when they join the church, you make them also vow to support the King of England." And Darby goes ballistic, for good reason. He finds that just appalling. It's the, let's get these people under our thumbs. It's England doing what it does best in the time of empire. And Darby says, absolutely not. And he resigns his ordination as, a curate is a priest in training. So he just gets rid of that. But he's got to figure out what to do with his life. He hasn't figured it out yet. And he has this writing accident soon after. And he's kind of bedridden for a while. And what he does in bed is he reads the Bible. He's not done this before. He's been, a priest in training, but the Bible, it's not as important as learning the liturgy and everything else. So he reads the Bible, and he reads it through the lens of what's been happening and his anger at the Anglican Church, and also he's just disillusioned with any organized religion at this point. Doesn't believe that there should even be paid clergy now. It's all coming from this one archbishop of Dublin. And there's this thing's happening, this great awakening is happening in the British Isles. And that's part of what's been happening that's empowered Darby because, again, people are responding to his call to come to Christ. So to make a longer story short, with 6 other clergy who are also disaffected and disgusted with organized religion, they start what's called the Plymouth Brethren Church. Anybody been a Plymouth Brethren here or related to? No ministers, no paid clergy, and it seems to be a good place for Darby to land. He also has this eschatological interest. Eschatological means end times, right? And he attends this thing called the Powers Court Conference in 1831. And here's a Scottish clergyman named Edward Irving say that a sign preceding the coming of Christ to earth would be tongue speaking and prophecy. He was kind of excited by that. Tongue speaking and prophecy. Now, the idea of Jesus returning to earth has been around for a long time. But it's just sort of, yeah. We believe that. We're not going to go there because Jesus declared saying he didn't know when it was going to happen. So, for the first 1,800 years of Christianity, this is not important until now. Until now. This Powers Court Conference is just one manifestation of people saying, this may be happening. We're in a time of chaos. Maybe this is what Jesus was talking about when he said there'd be wars and rumors of wars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this man named Irving, Edward Irving, a Scottish clergyman, had actually been at the Powers Court Conference a year before when a teenage woman whose last name is MacDonald, he's a good Scot, MacDonald, goes into a trance during the conference for 2 hours in which she's looked at carefully by everyone. And she comes out of this and she says that at the time the church At the time of Jesus' coming, the church is going to be removed from the world before the battle of Armageddon, before the time of tribulation, okay? So she says this is what's going to happen. Nobody had that idea before, that that everybody's going to be raptured away. Okay, now, is this biblical? Where's the guidance? Here's a scripture that they pointed to at the time, those who believed what this young woman had said. It's from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Paul's saying, okay, so the Thessalonian Christians are, this is the new, it's even before the church has begun, these people gathering in the name of Jesus. And they believed at that time, for whatever reason, we don't know, that Jesus would probably be back in their lifetime. And they were just hanging out together until that happened. Back to earth to judge the earth. Where is he? And they're saying that with some trepidation, because this is the year 50, 51, 52, something like that. Is 30 years after 20 years after Jesus' crucifixion. And some of their loved ones are dying who are part of their little quote-unquote church. And some of them are sick. And they're wondering, does that mean that when he comes, the dead are just dead? No hope? And Paul says this, "But we would not have you ignorant, brethren, concerning those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep." Your beloved aunt and uncle. "For this we declare to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, shall not precede those who have fallen asleep." Okay? Don't worry about them. They're okay. "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. And then we who are alive, who are left, shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words." Okay. Now, all our lifetime, the people who've talked about the rapture said, that's it. That's happening. Dead rise. The rest of us who are Christians are going to rise, and then we're all going to go off together. That is not what Paul had in mind at all. What Paul said was, where he gets this stuff, I don't know. Jesus is coming back, the dead will rise, and then we will meet the Lord. And the trumpets and all of that, that is all language that people that would be familiar with, because it's what happens when a king or an emperor comes and he of course it's he, is greeted in the coming, right? They come to the city gate, trumpets and all things, all this. You greet him in, you bring him in, have a big feast. So with Jesus, he's coming in the air, so why wouldn't we all just greet him in the air? Let's all do it. Okay? And then we come back, and then together, we are with Jesus while he judges the earth. That's their idea. Rapture? No, not at all in the story as Paul tells it. If only he was here to say, stop this. But no, this is how it goes. This is how things get misinterpreted. So Darby gets real excited by the example of this woman who says, no, the church is going to be removed from the earth before Armageddon, before the war. Isn't that so wonderful, right? The world's going to go to hell, but we all get to go to heaven. That is so selfish and thoughtless, right? I mean, it's really. In this movie, I see there's this minister, this guy, the main character, I guess, is an airline pilot, and his daughter and wife get raptured away, and he wonders what happens. And he goes to the church they went to, and one of the ministers that's been raptured and the other stayed. And the one who stayed said, I asked Jesus to let me stay behind so I could talk to him. That's what happens in that one. Well, whatever. whatever. So anyway, this is where Darby gets the idea of this secret rapture that's supposed to happen before all the bad stuff. Okay, so this whole thing could have been a flash in the pan, except that Darby comes to the United States with this message. And Americans just love this stuff, right? This is it. He comes to America. And he meets the Billy Graham of his day, Dwight L. Moody. Y'all know Dwight L. Moody? Anybody been to the Moody, what's it called? The Moody Institute of the Bible in Chicago? Chicago, right? The Moody Bookstore. The Moody Bookstore. Yeah, this is a big deal. I figured somebody here, his uncle, would be a Moody Bible person or something. Very lay directed, but a lot of people very interested in this. Anyway, so he connects with the Moody guy, and novels start being written. First one's called Jesus is Coming, and these sell really well. They figured this out back in the 1830s, that this was going to happen. Now, what's happening in the 1800s is German critical thinking is happening. Okay, this is all out of the Enlightenment. And they're looking at the Bible against history for the very first time. And there's a reaction from the rank and file folk who say, German theologians and people with PhDs are not going to tell me what to believe. I got my faith from my grandfather and my grandmother, and it's simple, and that's what God meant. So I'm going to read the Bible any way I want. Well, against that movement, which has permeated the United States and our institutions of higher learning like Harvard and Yale, et cetera, comes those in the evangelical movement who say, we got to get our act together here and get our own scholars educated with our thoughts in mind, right? So that we can say a word or two about this against them with people we can stand up who are educated and say, well, it's not the only way to look at the book of Matthew and chapter 24. So you've got the Moody Institute starting that, but it taking hold mostly in Dallas, Texas, outside of Fort Worth, right? With the Dallas Theological Seminary, which comes up at this time, for this very purpose of standing up against European scholarship about the Bible that they had no use for, and that didn't take the Bible literally anymore, right? Okay, so before all this time, people thought the church was the new Israel. Darby said, no, the church was an afterthought, a plan B. It needed to be removed so that God could deal with the Jews, which was God's plan. So God sent Jesus on the earth to save the Jews. Trouble is, the Jews said no. Now, this is highly simplistic, knowing as we do that a lot of the first Christians were Jews. We're Jews. They didn't say no. They were like you and me. Some say no, some say yes. It's the way it works. No, this says black and white. All the Jews said no. All the Jews said no. Okay, so God has to get the Christians away in the rapture so that God can come to earth and deal with the Jews. Really? This is the idea. So for 30 years, Darby does this intercontinental ministry all the way from a lot in France, a lot in England, and comes to America 7 times between 1862 and 1877. 1862. What's happening in 1862? Civil War. People are ripe for this stuff in the war, right? Because who knows what's going to happen with this war. Everybody might be dead. So he comes, and this plants the seed of this whole idea of the rapture and the fact that God's got this thing about the Jews. Anyway, so what comes are these conferences these things have been happening. If you know anything about the burnt over area of New York, there's all, since the 1820s, there have been these gatherings where people are preached to and saved with wonderful camp singing and all the rest, which is, meaningful. So those conferences have gone on. And out of that sprang the Jehovah's Witnesses, who said that Jesus is coming back to the world and is going to judge the world through us. And the Mormons, who said Jesus is coming back to the world and we Latter-day Saints will judge with him. And Seventh-day Adventists said Jesus is coming back to the world and he will judge the world through us, right? And Darby said, no. Church is going to, those who are really Christians, and there's not very many of them, are going to go to heaven and get out of the way so God can judge the Jews. So, it's all crazy. When I went to Israel in 1999, we went, this 1999, just before 2000, right? So we went, the group I was with, who were all ministers, went on the Temple Mount, and we went through security, which the Jews, what am I saying? The Israelis, shepherd you through. And they looked at us and practically undressed us because they were sure that some American clergy person around the year 2000, was going to strap dynamite on his person and go on the Temple Mount and blow up the mosque there that's on the spot where Abraham was supposed to have sacrificed Isaac, and bring in and force God's hand. This is a theology. This is the evangelical theology. Force God's hand to end the world. And they let, the Muslims come and go. They didn't even look at them, come and go. But American clergy, watch out for them. They're nuts. That's what they secretly, and they couldn't say that because there's so much money coming for defense from America to prop up the Israeli military. But secretly, I mean, what they really believed was we were crazy. We were crazy. Okay, so anyway, so there are these things called the Niagara Bible Conferences that really put this on another plane. And this starts in 1876, goes from 1876 to 1897 with only 1 year off. And there are week-long revivals in which people expect that during that week, maybe tonight, when the preacher is preaching, Jesus will come back. And it's really big. But, it goes on. After 20 of these in a row, you get a little weary, right? Hasn't happened yet, right? This always happens. There's a weariness that sets in. And there was this man named James H. Brooks, who was the main champion in America of this conference, is a Presbyterian pastor. Presbyterians are all over this. From St. Louis, and he publicized these meetings in his magazine, which was called, wait for it, Truth. Wasn't called Truth Social, but anything that's called Truth is far from it, right? Let's just acknowledge that. Anything that's called truth is a lie. I'm sorry. It's just proved itself over and over again. Okay, so, right, that's the truth. That's right. Thank you very much for disarming me. Okay, so among his disciples, this Brooks guy has a man named Cyrus Scofield. Anybody know about Cyrus Scofield? What? The Scofield Reference Bible, right? So this lawyer named Scofield has a lot of money, and he gets an idea that we're going to print our own Bible, and we'll put notes in it that are key to these texts, 1 Thessalonians 4, Matthew 24, Romans 20, that talk a little bit about the possibility, right, of God whisking us away, and all the notes are about that. So that when you tell these people who have this Bible, I have one in my office, this beautiful thing, gold leaf, Moroccan leather. I mean, this is some Bible. Really, it smells like, right? You go in the room, you know what's in there. So these are very beautiful things. And they've got all these notes. And the notes are, so if you tell somebody who's read this since they were children, right? And you tell them this is all bunk, you know, that he wasn't talking about meeting Jesus in the air and going away. It's just reading him and bringing him back to the earth. They're going to say, but it's in my Bible, right? I mean, in beautiful gold leaf with a sighting there. Jesus predicts the second coming. Well, that's the notes. That's not the Bible. So this is a very hard thing to talk about. So that was a big part of it, the Scofield Reference Bible. Millions of these things still out there. What we need to understand is that evangelicals knew very well that they were, as the century turned into the 20th, they were losing the culture war. And there was no event that was more indicative of this than the Scopes, quote-unquote, monkey trial, right? Called Monkey Trial by H.L. Mencken, who was, a respected journalist of the day who made fun of not Clarence Darrow, but who was the guy running for president 4 times? William Jennings Bryan, who defended the Bible, right? Defended the Bible and said that, humans didn't come from monkeys, which again is a perverted idea of the theory of evolution. So they're losing the cultural wars. They're being made a laughingstock of by none other than H.L. Mencken. And so having Dallas Seminary as a stronghold, the Moody Institute standing right behind them, and this monumental Scofield Reference Bible is really important. And they're using the formula from Mr. Darby about dispensations. There's what he means is periods of history. And there are 4 of them recorded in the book of Genesis. A 5th one is called the dispensation of the law, which they saw ranging from Moses, which is Exodus chapter 1, through the book of Acts and the birth of the church. That's what the book of Acts is, according to this understanding. The 6th is the dispensation of grace, which goes from the age of the church through the rapture. And then the final dispensation is called the dispensation of the kingdom, and it begins in Revelation 20. Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom judgment was committed. Also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony to Jesus and for the word of God, and who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and they shall reign with him 1,000 years. So most apocalyptically oriented believers at the time, again, believed Christ would return and rule on the earth for 1,000 years. And again, Seventh-day Adventists said he will rule with them. The Mormons said he will rule with them. The Jehovah's Witnesses said the very same thing. But Darby, again, said no, church is going to be removed again so God can deal finally with the Jews, because it all went to hell during Jesus' lifetime. Poor Jesus, he tried and failed. I mean, this is just kind of totally crazy. Okay, what else to say about that? So Hal Lindsey, late great Planet Earth, picks all this up and writes his book, all out of this Dallas Theological Seminary hashing of this history and quote-unquote theology, which is just bad. There's more to it than that, but I'll let it go with that. Just wanted to give you, a sketch of something that is hard to simplify, because it has many nuances, and there are many people in the Darby camp who believe various different things. But is this at all enlightening? Okay, yeah. And again, it couldn't be more prescient because once again, another movie's coming out and we're going to be reading about it in the New York Times and everywhere else. It's already been reviewed by the more evangelical magazines, not the big ones, but the smaller ones, and they all love it. And again, it's very political now, and everybody's going to be looking. I mean, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the Antichrist was Barack Obama, right? I mean, of course. And the mark of the beast is, this is really bad stuff. This is really bad stuff. And it's not over yet. So, questions, concerns? I don't have the answers. I told you everything I know.
I thought you knew when all this was going to happen.
No. Okay.
Well, I'll start with a comment, which is that what I see as a real kind of philosophical base behind a lot of the conflict between left and right is that in that world, they talk about the second coming and all kinds of things, but what it really boils down to is a worldview where things are going to hell. The earth is having problems. I think on that side they deny global warming, but I don't think they really deny it. I think they just deal with it differently and just see it as part of the end times.
Right. It won't matter because we'll all be gone anyway.
And we're coming to this end, but in their world, it's an end that involves a big battle between good and evil. And the new world is one where everything's at peace because our side won that big final battle. Whereas the other worldview, which I think most of us would be more at peace with, is that the world is having issues. We've filled the earth, we've subdued it, and we need to, the only way we're going to survive having lots of people on earth and all of our tribes all grown up and big is to get past tribalism and learn to live together. And those are two diametrically opposite worldviews for the end of the world. And it's really hard to reconcile those two views. But I hear that coming through the rhetoric from the right so much as it's all about being on our side and being on the winning side.
Right. So let me just, I appreciate so much you saying that because it helps us get to the book, Jesus and John Wayne. So here's a little bit of what's going on there. And one person who helped me with this was Richard Rohr, a wonderful Franciscan who's such a wise person, was at Texas Christian University. I think it was at Texas Christian. Go Texas Christian, go TCU. Sorry about the game. Anyway, so he was speaking, and he said, the funny thing about this state, I said, I love Texas, but he lives in New Mexico. He said, in Texas, you can go into any courthouse and they have the 10 Commandments on the wall, but do they ever have the 8 Beatitudes? And saying, the do's and don'ts are big. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. But what about how to live, which is Jesus' teaching, comprised very succinctly in the 8 Beatitudes about, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the peacemakers, all of that. So, when confronted with the teaching of Jesus, these evangelical folk who are in this book, which talks about their history for the last 100 years, when confronted with that, and the fact that Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, some will acknowledge that Jesus is a pacifist. But the way they nuance it is to say, well, that's after the final battle. That's after Armageddon. Their Jesus, this man's Jesus specifically said this, is on a white horse, like in Revelation, has a sword, and the sword is dripping blood. He is number one knight, killing people, right? That's Jesus, according to that way of thinking. It has to go there. It's all set up to go there. So
yeah, I've read that too, and it's like, if you go to some of these people and go, well, yeah, Jesus is coming back, but Jesus taught peace and love and mercy, right? And the answer is, well, he did the first time. But when he's coming back, he's pissed.
Right.
And I have read, I think a pastor on Facebook, friend of a friend on Facebook, say, basically, yeah, he tried being nice, but it's no more Mr. Nice Guy now. I mean, the second coming for some of these people is like a Die Hard movie. You know, it's
like a what?
A Die Hard movie. It's
Die Hard.
It's like, I've had enough of this injustice. I'm going to kill a bunch of people and fix it. And that's why it does no good sometimes to say, well, Jesus said this, and Jesus said this, and Jesus said that, and they'd be like, well, that was nice, Jesus. You know, that's not what we're dealing with next. You know, so anyway, who else has had experience in previous churches or in growing up with any of this stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Let's start in the back here.
Oh, boy. So I'm from San Luis Obispo County, or at least a good chunk of my life. Every single time I have been to a church there, it is pretty much that side, the bad one you were referring to. And I actually would not accept the Christian argument as righteous because of this. I was very swayed away from the faith because of these churches. This church is very excellent, actually, in response to this. So all I can say is, God bless you guys.
So my dad was a Nazarene minister, and this was part of the dogma that he would prepare and talk about. So of course I would believe it, you know, full line and sinker. And then even pass out tracts, because I knew what was right, and you were going to go to hell if you didn't read my tract and come to our church.
Yeah, and I passed just a couple days ago another one of those like nicely dressed Jehovah's Witness ladies standing out by their literature rack in the rain in Newport. And I was talking to somebody about their stuff, and they go, yeah, we have to go out and try to convert people, but we're just perfectly fine if they don't go along, because that just leaves more room in heaven for the rest of us. So they have kind of a mixed attitude toward that.
Oh.
My mother's response to Jehovah's Witnesses at the door was their belief that only 140,000 would be raptured, and that if they converted her, she would replace them.
Diane, did you still have a point?
Diane from Dallas?
No.
Well, I hate to rag on Texas, but my experience with being among evangelicals was when I lived in Texas approximately 2 decades ago. And I was in a deep conversation with a person about this undying allegiance to Israel and the terrible things that were being done to the Palestinians and all of this. And it was, you know, I didn't understand. I was trying to understand where this was coming from. And I was talking about peace and how we need to find a way to live together and blah, blah, blah. And finally, this person very clearly told me that they had to build up Israel so that it could all be smashed and ended, because that's when the end times would come. So they had to give all the money and all the everything they could to Israel so that the Jewish state could expand so that it could then be dashed, and then Jesus would come back.
Yeah, you reminded me that I think I was in college and visiting my old Baptist church's Sunday school class right when the Camp David Accords were signed. And we'd been taught this, you know, we're building up to this big battle between Israel and all of their neighbors. And then this peace deal was signed, and it really threw them for a loop. But of course, they went back to the prophecies and they found where, just before the end time, there would be a treaty or something. They change it on the fly. It was.
You've heard me say this before, I think, but I grew up in the Church of Christ, and all of my life, all of my childhood, we were taught that the people in the Church of Christ were the only people who were going to be saved because they were the only right church. And it was interesting to me at the time. I didn't believe it, and I remember getting punished for questioning it. I also remember this huge discussion between members of the congregation on the church steps about, are we going to die and go to heaven, or are we going to die and stay dead till we're judged and then go to hell or heaven, or, something that just we had no control over it. So why even think about it? Right. And when I finally started edging away from the Church of Christ, my brother started praying for me.
There you go.
He was a Church of Christ minister. And at some point in the last 10 years, he kind of mellowed, decided that was okay.
Oh, that's great.
Well, I had a recent experience. My entire family is from Texas and Oklahoma, and my father recently died, and a funeral home asked me if I had a particular minister that I wanted to be there. And he hadn't been there for years, so he didn't know anybody in particular. So I said, well, do you have a minister that might, be okay? And I said, I'm just looking for a Christian minister, moderate, mainstream kind of thing. And she said, oh, yeah, we have Pastor so-and-so. And so I went and Googled Pastor so-and-so, and I was like, holy cow, this is like not what I had in mind. So I finally tracked down a nice Methodist minister that did the service, but it reminded me that in this particular part of the world, that was mainstream.
Right.
Yeah, that I live in a different world.
And we are invisible.
Yeah.
This gathering, what we're saying, this is nuts.
Yeah,
to them.
And similarly, I went to my aunt's funeral once, and the pastor started ranting on and off about how, do you know why people are always buried with their feet facing east? It was because Christ was going to come from the east, and all of us that were in our graves would rise up to face him afterwards, and then went on to blame.
Don't bump your head.
And then went on to blame all the troubles in the world on the homosexuals and the teenagers doing drugs. And this was in the middle of a funeral. So it was just totally, I'm looking around going, and everybody else is just looking. Like,
I think Judy?
Yeah.
This is a lively discussion. I was hoping we'd have this.
I had a random thought come just last week out of nowhere, and I thought, remember when you were 8 and you could join the church then, and you would have to say, do you believe in Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Then you're saved. Let Jesus come into my heart. And I think, so Jesus wasn't in my heart when I was 7 years old and 364 days, but when I turned 8 and did this in front of the church, I was saved. I thought it was weird when I was 8. And I think it was weird. I mean, it's really interesting to think that I thought that was odd at 8 years old.
Yeah.
And it's a different thing. Yeah. And another thing was when I was 15, I went with my best friend to Mormon camp. And my mom was real nervous about this because it's a 2-week camp, and I was struck by the fact that the kids would go up into this mesa area. They always had their arms folded as a respect. That was kind of their prayerful thing. And one after the other said, I know this is the one true church. I know this is the one true church. And I thought that was also odd and came back and wanted to be a Mormon for about a week until I, not really probably, but it was interesting, just the whole things that people are exposed to. And I hope that whenever I hear anything that is following, one of my teaching assistants is a witness. And it's just interesting to see how people are just, they're in the middle of that and they cannot step out.
Yep.
So stepping out is so wonderful.
When I was in seminary, I lived in student housing, and we had an onslaught of Jehovah's Witnesses coming to our apartments one after another and evangelizing. And we were trying to figure out why are they coming to us? They know this is a seminary. And somebody heard them in the stairwell, overheard, and this one woman was weeping, who was a trainee. And the person said, "We're coming here because we know these people are all going to hell, and there's nothing that's going to save them. That's why we're training you here, so it's not on you." I thought, I don't know. No, they've given that, they're smarter than that. They've figured their way around that number.
I think Judy's bit about the one true church fits with what you said earlier about the word truth.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that this book, I think, is really valuable for us to hear. Like, it's easy for us to sit here and say, oh, those exotic people that have these really crazy beliefs, or maybe people in our family or whatever. That's an easy thing for us to recognize. But I think where this book really has power and why it's so valuable to do this class is because there's been a linkage, and the book covers this, between the history of evangelicals and the capturing of evangelicals as a political force.
Yeah.
That has great policy implications. And we do need to understand what is going on with it. We're probably not going to be able to convince people who believe this, or some of them believe it, some of them are using it as a political ploy to capture power. But it is very relevant and very important. And the book is great because it goes through the whole history. And those of us who've been alive, for the last 30, 40, 50 years will recognize how it evolved. Right. And it's just very helpful, I think, in understanding where we are now. What is our reaction as a society to Israel? What is our reaction to all these things? So I'm really glad that you decided to do this.
To the teaching of economic justice. They see that as coming from perverted liberals who are godless. Let's all just raise our hands. Perverted liberals who are godless. And, because the head of the UN is going to be standing up and saying one of these days that everybody should have guaranteed income. And anything that has to do with writing of economic justice has to be from the Antichrist. That's how the right has weaponized this movement, just as you said.
Yeah, and picking up on what Kathy said, I was also thinking as you were talking about these Bible passages and how they're interpreted, is it's also important for us to try to understand why the Bible says what it says, because it comes out of the political environment in which it was written. And the conflicts of that time are really what these passages are talking about, and that the earliest ideas of a Messiah coming who will raise the dead happened when there started to be martyrs for the faith in the Jewish world because of all of the battles and one of the empires that they were part of actually started just killing Jews for the heck of it. And that was kind of a new thing. And so it's like, what about all these martyrs? And so these apocalyptic writings about how a Messiah will come and all of these people who died for the faith will be raised all came out of that world. And if you ignore that Jewish history for why these passages were written, then you can throw whatever interpretation you want on them.
So this is helping me connect the dots on the faith that I was raised in. It was non-denominational, but ironically, from what you've been saying today, folks in the congregation refer to themselves as either the Friends or the Truth. But even though it wasn't really explicit, sort of like the end of times thinking, I don't remember that as a kid, like hearing a lot about that. Just like there not being a focus on sort of justice issues or, like economic justice, I don't remember ever hearing about that part of the Bible or that framing of it, or even just like where the earth was going or, like environmental justice. I think that explains why, like if you think you're gonna be leaving soon, then why do you care? So it's interesting to me that it's just a really different framing, so.
Right. And there's an interesting, go ahead and move that. Remember James Watt, who was head of the Department of Interior during Reagan, and how everybody said that he said, we don't have to be good to the environment because Jesus is coming back? He never said that. Liberals, we screw that up too. He believed it. Yeah. Pretty sure he believed it, but he never said it. And we got to be really careful about undercutting our own message by lying about the other side. Yeah.
So this is not about a particular church or understanding that I had as a child, except that it has slowly dawned on me over the many years that so much of the teaching, or the evangelistic or the extreme Republican, is kind of the same in a lot of ways as the people who justified slavery. Because they're essentially saying, well, we got to convert these people and then force them to work for. I mean, we're going to force them to work for us, but we also have to convert them so that we can feel justified when they work themselves to death or they run away and we kill them.
Because life is very short and eternity is very long. So we're getting them to eternity.
And it's the same way that the whole idea of giving everybody a guaranteed basic income would maybe lift all of those people up out of their extreme poverty. And then who would we have to work at McDonald's, or to cut apart chickens in the slaughterhouse, or various other things that are unpleasant.
Do jobs the rest of us don't want to do.
Well, I mean, even field work, going out and picking fruit, it just.
Ken?
Joni Mitchell's wonderful song about Jesus has the tagline, "Who are you going to get to do the dirty work when all the slaves are free?"
Ooh.
Think of, who are our brothers and our sisters, and Jesus, responding to his family versus who is around him. And we have so many that kind of forget the love, but are tied to their history, to their families, to the domination of the churches that their history is brought into. And so it's very hard for people to not be born again into ignorance, but to be thinking about what was the message of Jesus, what is social justice, what are the Beatitudes, and be able to break away from all these histories that we've had of organizations that are really trying to give a simple message so that people just ignorantly believe and go march in a certain direction, which is not social justice, which is not love, which is just collecting more stuff for us.
Yeah.
And
well said. If we don't do anything else with this book and what we're doing, my only goal personally is to get Jesus off the white horse, get the blood dripping sword out of his hand, and restore him to who he really was, so that his message can be publicized and considered Christian by those people who call themselves Christian who probably don't even know the message.
I think, so I grew up, this is like the story of my life, right? My dad started the Moral Majority chapter in my town and all this, I was homeschooled in it. So it was really weird reading it, like, I remember all that. But I do think something important to remember about our, and probably everyone is thinking this anyway, but our family members or our brothers and sisters and, those people that are in this kind of religion too, is there's a lot going against them leaving, in the sense that they've been raised up in such a fearful, it's just, the world outside of the church is terrifying. That's the point. It's like, here it's safe, and everywhere out there is scary, and God's not there, and you're going to lose your faith, and you're not going to go to heaven. And especially for, I have kind of a passion about this, but especially for children raised in that, believing that, it's really, really hard. You can't just come and say, well, but your interpretation's wrong, and the Bible, Jesus is pacifist, because there's like something so internal that's scary. It's hard to change that. It's almost like a psychological trauma, in a way, of thinking that you can get out of that. There's always that pull of like, well, what if, if I leave, I'm doing something wrong, and I won't go to heaven, and my family won't love me, and stuff like that. That didn't happen to me. I'm not really saying that happened to me, but I know that that's how it can be seen.
A lot of people feel that.
Yeah, so it's so powerful.
Thank you for making it easier for us to understand. Okay. Let's just have maybe one more question, and then we'll let y'all get off to lunch.
Well, I just do a lot of thinking about how do we take back the message of Christ, because so much the right side, the conservative side, has the airwaves, and it seems like the left side is more quiet and passive, and also that we don't get anywhere by saying we're right and they're wrong.
Right.
But we have to try to bridge, and we have to try to connect, and we have to try to understand where they're coming from and why they believe what they believe, so that we can find that middle ground, because there is middle ground everywhere. There's always some place where we can connect and agree. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important, to find that. And another thought I had is, sometimes Hollywood and like Disney movies and stuff try to show the good way, the kind way, the peaceful way to live. And I've observed that in some ways the conservative Christians have rejected Hollywood and Disney, and I think because of those messages, and I find that interesting and disconcerting a little bit. Anyway, those are just some thoughts.
All right. I think that's a really good place to end it. Feel free to stay and chat if you want to, but this is a really good start. And I do hope that this familiarizing ourselves with this book and our history that's happened in our lifetime, we'll be able to hear what people are actually saying to us when we're asked what we believe about these matters by folks on the other side, who inevitably we will come in contact with and talk with at the checkout counter and other places because the way the world is. So, great, thank you.